My name is Laura Grothaus, and I am a writer and visual artist. I live in Baltimore, Maryland right now. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I am working on a novel and short stories right now about kind of speculative, like next 50 years future, and specifically about labor organizing and unions. So I was always interested in creativity and writing and art. And I remember first starting to write poems around the time I was 8 years old. I wrote a poem about reading to my little brother who was 5 years younger than me, and just kind of has grown as an interest from there. I've always really enjoyed how creative pursuits kind of thread together and intertwine with each other. And so for me, I've often had like I'll give an example. I a couple of years ago started an altered books project where I was um, coloring out the center of books and sort of visually forming the components of the story to put them in. And that has felt like it really feeds some of my writing practice, where I get to have a balance of not having to deal with words and then having to, and then getting to return to words and like all that they offer. And with this particular project, the novel and short stories, I knew that I wanted to do a longer project, that I wanted to work on a novel. And often in my process, I have maybe too many ideas rather than too few. And so the idea of like, what do I choose? What do I work on? Since a novel is such a dedicated amount of time, and I really think that time is a hugely valuable resource, and I devote so much of it to community and friends um, and paid work and things like that, that I really wanted to be intentional about it. So with this project, I did this kind of process of finding clearness about what I wanted to work on, and wrote on index cards every idea I had for stories and kind of like what they would offer me and what they might offer other people and what I could imagine happening inside of them. And through that process, as I like kind of studied more and more to see what what spoke to me among those various factors, this book emerged. And I actually didn't write it down on a note card. I just like through the process of looking at all of these ideas was like, I want to work on this one. This is just it just like kind of came to me through that process that this was the thing I wanted to do. And part of that was also like if you're working on a novel, you like the process has to be as fulfilling as the final product, because it could very well never see the light of day. And so I I thought, if I'm working on a novel uh about like the history of unions, that is also about the future of them, I get to do really interesting research and talk to really fascinating people. So I've done this process of interviewing friends who are involved in that kind of organizing, old timers who, did it for many years and are now retired, members of labor choruses and stuff like that. And so it's been very cool to me to get to do the research and sort of have that be a fulfilling part of it too. So that was the beginning of my creative journey all the way through to this present project.
Where do you typically draw your inspiration from?
Oh, great question. I think it's a mix of things. For a long time, I was really inspired by myth and fairy tale and really old stories that humans have told for centuries and centuries, and thinking about how we retell them now and kind of what significance they've held for us. I think more recently, like with this project in particular, it's like a mix of the research that I'm doing and just like the kind of compost heap of my brain of like everything I've ever experienced and sort of like what grows out of there. But yeah, I think that for me as a writer and visual artist, a lot, a lot of like the work that inspires me is work that is kind of playing with those speculative elements that are kind of like have their origin perhaps in fairy tale and folklore, and writers like Ursula Le Guin and Octavia Butler and painters like Remedios Varo and just people who are like interested in sort of how do you express the weirdness of our lives or like imagine kind of the magical possibilities of uh kind of furthest reaches of our world and brains. So yeah. And I mean, also, I'll say being at Azule, walking around and just getting to see the art that other people have made and the like amount of collaboration that has gone into this place, and then getting to walk around like the land around it and seeing these mountains that are like some of the oldest on earth, and just like being in places like that, I think is really inspiring.
Last question.
Great.
Is there a piece of advice that's like the best piece of advice you've received you would like to share
Mm.
with other artists?
I'm really considering this. It's a great question. I think there's a couple that come to mind for me. One is I heard George Saunders speak once, and he talked about finding the place in your work where you feel really confident, where when you sit down to do the work, you come to it with a sense of maybe not joy exactly, but uh, but maybe joy, and a sense that like uh, that what a sense of peace perhaps. And I think that that that's really huge for artists. I think oftentimes people like are are kind of taught to approach work with this sense of like gritting your teeth and angst. And I think that work we make can be really painful to produce, but that finding a place where sitting down to do it is um, isn't like a isn't like pinching yourself over and over again. That finding the places where you feel confident and finding the moments for joy in it. That comes to mind. Um, I also maybe strangely am thinking about this thing my mom told me once where I was on a walk and she was like, Laura, I think your life is destined to be complicated. Maybe it's just destined to be good. And I was like, whoa. And I still think my life is destined to be complicated, but I think sometimes maybe I could entertain the possibility that it's just destined to be good. So those are the two pieces of advice that come to mind for me.